Hello and welcome to Building High Performance Cultures, a weekly series where we talk with executives from top organizations about how they've built high performance cultures and how they're leveraging their culture as competitive advantage. I'm Marty Parker, the President and CEO of Waterstone Human Capital, and my guest today is the CEO of Ottawa Community Housing, Stéphane Giguère. Stéphane, welcome to Building High Performance Cultures.
Thank you for having me.
Delighted to have you. Now, a little bit about Stefan. Stefan is the CEO of the largest social housing provider in Canada's national capital, leading an award-winning organization that directly impacts the lives of over 32,000 residents in 15,000 Ottawa community housing homes. Now, Stefan promotes the organization as being more than a bricks and mortar landlord. Instead, it's a high-profile corporation with expertise in asset management, community development, government and stakeholder relations, finance, and business development. And he makes it a priority to incorporate the diversity, of tenants' needs into the services that the organization delivers. Now, working with his team to build on the organization's solid foundation, Stefan is positioning the corporation for sustainable growth by identifying new sources of funding, along with business development opportunities in both the private and the not-for-profit sectors. And under Stefan's leadership, Ottawa Community Housing was named one of 2020's Canada's Most Admired Corporate Cultures. So here's to that, Stefan. Now, Stefan, I want to start by talking a little bit about the corporate culture at Ottawa Community Housing. How would you describe the culture today?
The culture at Ottawa Community Housing is really one of inclusion, leadership, and accountability. It's something that when I joined about 7 years ago, really I was looking at what are the core strengths of the groups, because there's always that notion of saying that your best assets are your people, but what our people had to say at the time about the organization. And it was really not that clear about, what would be my contribution on the day-to-day. Say that I'm a maintenance worker going in one of the 15,000 homes we have, and I'm fixing the door of one of the tenants. How does it relate to the strategic plan? How does it connect to the mission? And I did find early on that connection was not that clear for the staff, was not neither clear for the governance or the executive team. And the journey really started, from that conversation and really engaging right on at the beginning with the staff and making sure that we had that connection right there.
Wonderful. Now, the organization, Ottawa Community Housing, is a great example of how assessing and curating culture can help drive success. So talk a bit about what drove you and your team to undertake a review of your culture just a few years ago.
Marty, thanks for that question, because you touched on something earlier that is important for us, diversity and inclusion. And for us, part of the conversation around the culture was, how can we be purposeful to reflect on the diversity that we are serving? We are serving tenants in 28 different languages. So when you start thinking about that, how can you make sure that your culture journey also reflect on where you want to be? And we started having the dialogue internally about, what are we tolerating and not tolerating from a management standpoint? And this is kind of a demarcation point, because you tend to let things go on their own over the years, and all of a sudden you start realizing that, the direction is going this way and we should steer the other way around. And one of the goals was really, how can we realign the organization to make sure that management, the staff, the partners, the contractors are all aligned in the same direction. And again, connecting the dots between the high level strategies that you elaborate, in a boardroom, to again being in the field and serving the tenants or your clients. That was really one of the missing link that we saw early on, that we thought that let's be intentional and let's change it. And we decided to undertake that journey with that mindset of being there and making sure that the culture will be, the reflect of our DNA as an organization, and that we will be able to really, walk the walk and talk the talk on what we're doing here.
You talk about being intentional and connecting the dots. Let's kind of unpack that a little bit if we can.
Sure.
What did the kind of cultural assessment and that cultural curation process look like for you at Ottawa Community Housing as you kind of went through that process and were very intentional about connecting those dots?
Yes, and it started with a conversation with the entire staff. I mean by that, that we went out and met with each and every one of the staff of the organization, having a dialogue about what do you feel about the culture of OCH? What it is, that culture, what it could be, and we asked those questions, and we were also ready to, being uncomfortable in some of the answers, and be ready to adapt and change. And the goal again was in the back of our mind and the back of the mind of the staff to really better serve our clients. So having always in mind that we're doing this not for ourselves, for the clients, and how it will readapt. So one aspect was those consultations with all of the staff members, and we started extending beyond the staff to look at contractors. OCH, we have about 400 staff, about 600 contractors. So it's important that you embrace the stakeholders part of the conversation, but we went beyond that. We said we need to also engage governance. So our governing model include 38 different individuals, volunteer or community members or elected members. And for us, it was also important to get their views about the culture. What is the culture? And just as an anecdote I remember talking to one of the key stakeholders, and they were wondering, why are you talking about the culture? Why is it so important? And I said, this is exactly why we're doing it, because you're asking that exact same question. It's because we need to understand what fascinates the day-to-day of OCH and makes OCH that leader in our space, in our field. And once we were in the position to better understand that from our staff, from the stakeholders, now we were able to summarize it. What we realized in the summary process, though, that it will be a journey. It won't be the start point and an end game. The end game is, it will be on and on and on and on. There's an element that we realize also that you can operationalize culture, but there's an element where you cannot operationalize culture. It's more about the willingness, the intention, back exactly to that point of being intentional, and how, as leaders, also we set the tone and we provide the proper tone to the staff and to the industry as well to become, the leader that we are now at OCH.
Now, you ended up through this process with a culture roadmap. Describe what that is and how it's being used at Ottawa Community Housing today.
The roadmap is really the alignment, is our user guide. Like in your car, you have your user guide, you do your checkpoints and everything. A little bit of that was to how we can make it accessible to everyone, and I was to say all of us working at OCH, that there's a reference, but also that you understand that there's a commitment as well, right? It's like when you go to the garage and you know that you did your oil change, but you know that you have to redo it in the next 10,000 kilometers, right? But that's the same checkpoint that we do in our journey, is to commit everyone to say, you know what, in maybe 6 months, in a year, we'll be back asking you questions or getting you feedback. And in the meantime, we're collecting also information. So the journey is also, the roadmap associated with the journey of the culture is also to connect governance as well, because we have many initiatives. Early on, Marty, you touch on, many projects. In the last 7 years, we have raised more than $500 million of new investments at OCH. It's massive. And you need also the commitment of everyone to deliver on those new projects. But at the same time, we still have to manage the day-to-day of the portfolio of 15,000 homes. So how do you make sure that people embrace the new environment that we're creating, but at the same time that we're still operating in the old environment with sometimes older buildings or older homes? And the journey around the culture was really to make sure that everyone will stay proud of the work that they have to do, no matter if it's a new building or a very older building, 1892, the oldest that we have at OCH, but making sure that we can, connect the dots again along the way. The roadmap, it's not a static document, it's very dynamic. It's going to our corporate performance committees at the governance level, and it's presented at the board once a year as a refresh, an update, and with some commitments toward some goals that they are important, not only for our HR groups, but also for the entire organizations. And part of the roadmap, one commitment that we made was to evolve the HR function. You may have noticed that our executive, the title is People, Culture, and Communication. So if you look at the element of the role, there's a loop around that is important, because the way that we communicate, and with Zoom, we learn a lot that we have to communicate a lot and even more than before, where, a town hall once a year was enough. Now you go maybe every second week or every month, and you engage with your staff, or maybe every day you engage with your staff. And that's the new norm, because people expect that we will, deliver more, and we have to deliver to their homes as well. I mean, the staff for working from home, as well as the field workers, that they are connecting with us on their cell phone and devices while they are deployed. So again, for me, those are the element of the roadmap and that journey. So it's the element of communication, the element of technology also behind it, but also the notion of culture being more than a statement. It's a commitment, really.
Yeah, it is a commitment, and behavior is what drives that commitment. As CEO, you talk a lot about communication. What has been your role in communicating and supporting these changes, the roadmap, that curated culture?
The role of the CEO around the culture is really to set a tone, to really establish that, is it a priority for the corporation? But also you have to be intentional, as I said earlier, but also truthful to the process. It's not just a check the box process on its own. It's a commitment to talk with the staff about the engagement around the culture. What does it mean for management, but what does it mean for the staff? And being the conduit of that conversation is really one of the key roles of the CEO who wants to be successful in that journey with the culture. Otherwise, you always have the option to say, what, I will hire someone that will be in charge of the culture and go run with it and report back once in a while. That's an approach. But once you are engaged as a CEO, as an executive, to make it happen, making it real, when you walk in the field or you walk the plant, or you walk, with your staff in the offices, and you start talking, and we're all talking the same language, that's now creating the common denominator that create that sense of belonging to the organization and have that common purpose and goal that we want, yes, as an executive, but as a corporation as well. So, and this is where the beauty of the culture conversation is really that alignment of those conversations that we see now at OCH. Ottawa is a very vast city. It takes an hour and a half to cross the city, and without any traffic. So you can imagine that you go from East End to West End, to the north or south of Ottawa, because this is our portfolio, and you talk to our staff, and they can tell you that they are really proud because they can make a difference. And this slogan that I just said was in fact developed by the staff in response to what does it mean to work at OCH and what should be our culture statement. So you can appreciate now that what I just said is I just repeated what the staff told me, that why they are coming in early in the morning or logging in early in the morning nowadays, and to make that difference in someone's life here.
So I'm curious, how is this culture transformation really help drive performance at Ottawa Community Housing?
So it's important, again, to understand that for us, the notion of the performance was to be able to establish some baseline in terms of performance, baseline around KPIs that we all collectively agree. And also evolve languages around quality assurance. The sense of belonging also was creating that extension that our communities, our buildings, our properties are the extension of your workplace. And how we can make sure that everyone has at heart to make sure that we deliver the best possible services in our communities. And again, in the last 3 or 4 years that we've been in that journey, what we've seen are those results. Being, recognized, with this award was one aspect, but what we've seen also is the level of responsiveness, of leadership that we are seeing from the staff, contractors, partners, volunteers that they are coming over, all with the same goal of making that difference in someone's life.
Now, you talked about leadership, Stefan, and one of those goals of this 10-year, not often do you see 10-year strategic plans, but you have one, is to foster culture of leadership, accountability, and continuous improvement. But what does a culture of leadership actually look like at Ottawa Community Housing?
And I'm glad that you asked this question because personally, I always believe that strategic plans should not be more than 3 years. However, if you look at the assets that we're managing, they will be there forever. Social housing was there 50 years ago, likely will be there in 50 years. So having a 10-year horizon on assets that will still be there is still honest. Taking a step back around it, though, we do have touch points about, after 2-3 years, how are we doing? We rescan the environment. We look at our culture. Are we heading in the right direction? And in terms of culture of leadership, it's a culture of ready accountability. It's important for the executive team, for the directors, the managers, and any supervisors and the staff to understand, that you are not, here working in an environment where we expect you to show up early in the morning, punch in at 9 o'clock and leave at 4. It's more about the accountability. You have a work to do, and nowadays with working from anywhere, not only from home, but anywhere, that, the staff work from a restaurant, a Starbucks or wherever, and that they deliver on the services that they have to. You know what? I'm just amazed when I see that, because for me, this is accountability. You have a work to deliver on, and that's what, people are expecting out of us as an organization. And the other aspect around also accountability for me is making sure that the executive team communicate well as well. So it's not only to the CEO, it's making sure that all along the way, the messages are clear, they are crisp, the targets are understood, and also the involvement of the staff is there. But this is also a dialogue. It's not just a one-way communication. And this is where, when we started that journey, we asked staff, what do you think about the culture at OCH? And, I remember some executive around the industry, they were telling me, you may not want to know that. And I was like, no, I really want to know that. And I want to be pushed. I want to be challenged. And that way we will be able to really improve from where we are. And where we were was not bad, but I knew that instinctively that this organization has a lot to offer, amazing staff, amazing clients, and how we can really, stand for them and raise the bar as much as we can here.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're seeing, you're extremely collaborative and engaging and communicative with your team. And we're seeing, in our work, more and more people, employees, team members that want to connect to the purpose of their organization. They want to feel like they have impact and they're recognized for the contribution, and the meaning is greater for them. How have you been able to leverage your purpose to both attract but also retain your top talent?
If we look back at OCH, talent retention and acquisition of talent was a challenge. And there were many reasons for that. Perception, social housing, the stigma sometimes associated with the environment. And and I will say that we had a lot of great work to do to communicate better at the time. I go back 6, 7 years ago. Uh, Purposely, we made an effort to get to be known for the good reasons and not the bad reasons. And in fact, every time that we were to have a one bad news, I was always saying push 10 good news. And nowadays, in fact, people realize that our environment are, composed of amazing people. Our tenants are just amazing tenants, but they are like you and I. And in fact, with COVID, people have realized even more than before that you and I can be more vulnerable than we think. Mental health, is affecting now 76% of the population in Canada because of COVID. 6 years ago, you will have said that people will have said, "Oh, yeah, but you know what? It's not me. It's maybe some clients that you help that need assistance." Now it can be your friends, your family, and that's exactly what happened to some of our residents. They were victim of car accidents, and all of a sudden their life, they were professional, life changed, and changed radically within an hour or two, and they went from being that brilliant physician or a brilliant teacher to now be living on ODSP for the rest of their lives. So how do you adapt to an environment like that? Those stories were not that well said and shared and communicated in the past. And we made that point to make sure that first the story will go out properly. And secondly, now internally, what we started realizing also was how can we enhance the qualification of the staff? You said earlier, we have asset management group. I can tell you, we have the most amazing mechanical, structural, civil engineers working at OCH. In accounting, CPAs, but coming from CMAs, coming from chartered accountants. In HR, our accredited HR specialists. About 5 years ago, it will not have been that possible to attract that type of talents at OCH. And now I look at our maintenance worker, professional carpenters, electricians, plumbers joining the corporations, professional in pest management, certified. So when you look at the caliber and what it does, when you change your culture, you also attract the people that the organization needs. And also they push you further. They make you, back to what I said earlier, I love to be challenged. And now I have people around me that they are challenging me because they are the best in their field, the best social workers, the best psychologists, and they are working for OCH, and the same in IT, and the same in property management. So when we talk about the culture and investing, this is one of the net benefit of investing in your culture, is to the ability to attract talent, and to share with you that our turnover rate is down to 1.4%. Find me an organization at that level. And so I'm really proud. We don't usually brag much about what we do outside of, because as you said, we're so busy. But if you look at the indicators, there's a story to be said about what's going on here.
No, there absolutely is. You talked about mental health, and last year you introduced at Ottawa Community Housing a mental health leadership certificate program, pardon me, for your leaders. Now, why was this important? And tell us, add a little color to it, and tell us about how the response has been.
The program around mental health for the leaders at OCH is really based on the fact that, if I take that step back earlier about who we serve, we do have a portion of our clients that they are suffering from mental health. And again, over the years, unfortunately, we've seen stigma associated with conditions of certain individuals. And what was important was really to educate everyone around mental health, to have the same level of conversations, and also to have a common understanding of the needs and how we can approach mental health in our communities. Along the way, also, we started realizing that conversation needed to be extended internally in the corporations. Why? It's one thing to say, "Hey, how are you doing this morning?" and walking and just running. I still want to answer your question. You asked me, "How am I doing?" and you ran away. No, If you're asking me, how am I doing? It's because you're intentional to know that I'm feeling maybe well or maybe not that well today. And then this is a responsibility of the recipient to discuss and have that conversation and to see how we can really understand better mental health. Mental health is, something that is that has been around for years, but now we talk more about it. Uh, but there's still a little bit of stigma associated around mental health. It's not that visible. Sometimes we judge people that they may be quiet for a day or two at their desk, but likely something is going on. How can we address it? How can we? It's one thing to say, call EAP, but it's another thing to be there and to be that, ear that they need to talk, and sometimes that voice to just have a conversation with. So for us, it was really how about we can engage in that dual conversations with our staff, be prepared to have those moments where someone may need you more than you expect. And also when we go back into our communities, also to have a better understanding of what's happening in our communities.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I bet you the benefits are going to go far beyond kind of your own team members, but your stakeholders and your residents. I'm sure it already has. Now, in more frequent times, we're working on almost a year here now. How has Ottawa community housing been faring through the COVID-19 pandemic? And what role has your culture played in helping you kind of get through the many changes that have come about over the past number of months?
Thanks, Marty, for this question, because interestingly, if it will not have been of the culture, I don't think we will have been as successful as we've been through COVID, as difficult and sometimes desperate it could have been in our communities around COVID. We just to share that, unfortunately, the most vulnerable in Ottawa tend to be racialized, low-income communities, and out of the top 5 in Ottawa, 4 are communities around neighborhoods of Ottawa community housing. So you can imagine that they are the heroes that we talk about, right? That they work at the grocery, they work at the pharmacy, they accumulate 4 or 5 jobs, they are at the warehouse at night. They are the clients that we serve. They are the one that also were impacted by COVID. And what we've seen is the magic of the culture. At one point, we made a call to staff to volunteer to go to homes. So we had 16 volunteers, staff volunteers, to be trained in hazmat, to be deployed in our communities. And as we speak today, they've been deployed about 300 times. So when you think about that, find me an organization where staff will say, hey, I'm ready to go. I'm there for that call of duty to help in our communities. And this is because of, back to what I said earlier, every day they wake up to make a difference in someone's life. And, we've seen that with our safety officers. We have a safety group that they are deployed each and every night. Make a point as a CEO also to go in our communities. So I've been in our communities during COVID. And why? Because it's important to get a pulse on the situations. Back to your question earlier about, that roadmap around that journey around the culture is also to be agile. Part of our journey and the roadmap, nowhere in our plans was indicating that we will have a pandemic that we'll have to deal with. But somewhere in our plans was that we know that we will always have needs that will go way beyond what is expected. We've been impacted by a tornado 2 years ago in Ottawa, where we had about 14,000 people at OCH without power for 5 days. Their fridge were going off empty, after a couple of days, and we had to find ways to bring food now to the families, to the kids. So the extension of the culture in what we do is really not only to see staff going above and beyond, but it's really to see that, everyone is still accountable to our mandate and accountable to our clients. And that's what we've seen with the culture.
I'm going to switch gears on you here a little bit, Stefan, and I really love this question. and I'm really curious to hear your answer to it. And that is, what is one myth about working in the public sector that drives you crazy when you hear it?
Working in the private, I had the chance to work in the private sector as an entrepreneur. I work in private sector in large organizations, and also in a Crown Corporation just prior to join Ottawa Community Housing. And what I will say that drives me crazy about the myth is the efficiency. I saw inefficiencies in private sector, in SMEs, and in large corporation. And for me, it's back to the leadership. I saw amazing deputy ministers running, driving their organizations like you will see a CEO driving, his organization. And for me, what drives me crazy is sometimes the stigma associated with the private sector, they are way better than the public sector, and the other way around, public sector will say, yeah, but they don't understand that we're there to serve the population. Both sides are doing something, and they have in common something. It's to serve. You serve your client, you serve your citizen, and there's more commonalities than differences between the two sides. One aspect that is also important to recognize, part of serving, is that you still have to balance a budget. You still have to find new ways to fund your organization. Ottawa Community Housing as an organization, more people don't realize it, but close to 55 to 60% of our revenues are already rent revenues. It means that it's like anybody else who's a landlord right now. We collect our rents. If someone is on time, it's great. If someone is not on time, it's less great. And we have to manage and balance our book at the end of the year. Yes, we have subsidies, but in the private sector, you get access to tax credits, R&D credits, and elements like that. So all in all, what you see is more about the leadership. The leadership of the individuals, at the head of the organization will make the big difference. And again, part of the myth to say that the public sector will be less efficient, that's one that I heard many times. And unfortunately, it's not always true. And it creates that stigma associated with that non-performance around governments. And in any large corporations, because size will matters. If you're private sector or your government, to steer a ship, it's one thing. To steer a Sea-Doo, it's another thing. So if you are in a small Crown Corporation with 10 employees, you will have fun. You will go on your waves and it will be fun. You're on your Sea-Doo. But if you are in a large corporation, you're more the mothership, and it takes time. And sometimes even you need to be towed to steer. So, and that's important to, again, understand that the reality of the organization is also a factor that will influence those myths that we will see around private and public sector.
Yeah, you bet. So let's look ahead. 3, 4, 5 years. What do you see as critical to aligning your people to your culture and to sustaining this high performance culture that you've built at Ottawa Community Housing?
I will say exactly what we do today. How we better communicate, how we leverage technology, how we piggyback on this new environment. And that was something that we started 2 years ago with building information systems. With AI, people will be surprised that we do AI in our building. We monitor our gas emissions, GHGs. So there's a lot of innovation that will be the driver of this culture adjustment, adaptation, or what we call nowadays pivot. And for me, it's all about how can we remain agile in an environment that will change even more rapidly. But at the same time, also, we have to do everything very respectfully. Mm-hmm. All of us will be exhausted at the end of the pandemic. It's called PTSD. Yep. It's called mental health. Yeah. So it's important to realize that, the day that they say, what, we're in the green zone and you can go, not everyone will be ready to run. We will be still impacted. So as a leader also will have to be mindful about the capacity of the organization to undertake new ventures. Yes, we will be full of ambitions, we will be ready to go, but not everyone will. And we have to be mindful and again, respectful. And that will be part of our culture to gauge where we are as an organization in 2-3 years. And post-pandemic, for us, what would be really important, again, will be to create that sense that we are delivering best possible services to our residents and that we are still on our journey to deliver more affordable housing in Ottawa across the spectrum of affordability that people are expecting from us.
Very good. And what trends do you foresee coming in terms of building high performance culture?
A couple of trends, in fact, because what we will be seeing first reinforcement of the alignment to your core values. It was one thing to say, hey, I will be working for this company. And we saw that with COVID a lot, right? You join a place almost for the workplace and the colleagues and the environment. All of a sudden now you join the corporation because of the difference you will be making, but maybe you're doing it from home. Maybe you're doing it from somewhere else. So how we will be, able to really connect those trends around the ability of everyone to work from everywhere, but still belonging to the organization that they work with. So that's the element that will be a trend for me, how we will be able to connect. The other aspect around talent acquisition also will be that notion that this organization that I want to work for and with is really aligned with my own sets of values. It's way beyond our own set of I'm turning to, because we have on my wall, the values of the corporations, which stands, it's care, which stands for collaboration, accountability, respect, and excellence. It's one thing to say that, but how does it translate to someone who's not working for us right now, and that they will see that it does connect to them? The other element that we haven't spoke much about, but the financial impact of the culture. The more you will be investing on the culture, the more you will have a return on the culture. And the return will be on performance, on alignment, on better communications. And also one thing that is not to be discounted, the support of your stakeholders, your staff, in our case, contractors and volunteers, towards doing even more of your mission, more of your goals. So for me, those will be trends that they will be tied to the culture around the financial element, the talent acquisition, talent retention as well, and to become better at what you're doing. And it might sound cliche to say becoming better, but you have to also to have a baseline. Where do you start from? And now you can define where you can aspire to. And that's the portion that, we tend to look more at the aspire to, and we tend to forget where we are. And that's the portion where diagnostic of the organization, the culture, diagnostic, the positioning of the organization, and to have those frank conversations that you may think you are there, but you're just there right now. And you need to, go step by step to incrementally achieve your goals. So this is part of, what I've seen in terms of trends, and having great support around, because you cannot do it alone.
Yeah, well said. I think as we get deeper into our own practice of culture transformation, we're looking at not just the financial metrics, measurements, or outcomes, and the team member or employee metrics and outcomes. There are social impacts and outcomes, and then there are what I would call environmental or societal partners, suppliers,
Exactly.
stakeholders, and you've done that in reverse by including all of them in the development of your cultural assessment through to your roadmap. So I think what you've done, quite frankly, is far ahead of your time. People are still learning and figuring out, as we are, and as we address some of the challenges in the marketplace. So I tip my hat to you. My last question, Stefan, is really about your advice, and that is, if you were to give one piece of advice to a young person or a new leader who's just starting out on their own high performance culture journey, what would that be?
Listen to your colleagues, listen to your peers, listen to your supervisor, your clients, what they have to say about the culture. You may have joined the organization with a goal in mind. Maybe one day you want to become the CEO of the organization. And in order to get to your ambitions, you need to understand the culture that you are in. But what you need to understand is that you are the driver of the culture that you are in as well. And this is where, if I was to go back, young Stefan, eager, passionate, looking to really take over the world. And if I look back, it's so important that you listen and you take the time to listen, to build that understanding of you're a valued contributor to the organization. You're likely have most amazing ideas. At the same time, you need to make sure that everyone around you share also the same passion, the same goal, and also the same culture that you are in as an organization. And as a young leader, it's important to always be there to listen to your colleagues around and to really, bring that together on that. And you make me think a lot, because for me, it goes back now almost 30 years ago when I started. But if I look back, it's so important that, again, you take the time. You take the time to understand that culture that is around you. And thankfully, I will say to young leaders today also, thankfully, organizations are talking about their culture. In my days, culture, nobody was talking about it. You had to figure it out by yourself. So this is a big change. And I think that they can seize that opportunity to say, hey, you know what? The organization is talking about culture. I want my say in it. And please do so and challenge us.
100%. And you and I are not that far off in terms of vintage. It's about 30 years for me too. And it wasn't part of the conversation really, was it? Although I was fortunate, I started with Johnson & Johnson. We had a credo, people actually used it, and I would say they were ahead of their time, but it just wasn't a conversation that people were having really on a frequent habitual type basis. But the conversations that you've had with your colleagues at Ottawa Housing is really quite, community housing, I should say, incredible, because you've started by listening and doing a cultural assessment, and then really curating and deciding what you wanted, creating the roadmap to get you there. And these are things that include, I mean, listening, communicating, certifying leaders in things like mental health, and looking at, when you're listening and communicating beyond your team members, your stakeholders. There's just so much that so many can learn from what Ottawa Community Housing has done, and under your leadership and with your peers, Stefan. So we really thank you for everything you shared and for being our guest today.
Thank you, Marty. Thank you for the opportunity. It was great. It's always, always great to have the opportunity to discuss about the great things happening at Ottawa Community Housing and the great team that we have at Ottawa Community Housing. The culture is a celebration of their work.
Well, that's obvious. And I think this is a great opportunity for those people, young or not, who are listening, to say there is innovation as it relates to culture and performance in the public sector. And that is an opportunity, and we need more people who have great vision, great leadership, and great aspirations. People like you, Stéphane Giguère, who made their career both in the private but also in the public sector. And I think there's a great opportunity for people to be inspired through you and through what Ottawa Community Housing has done. So thank you.
Thank you, Marty, for your time. It was really, really interesting, and I look forward to continue our conversation.
It won't end for sure. And I want to ask all of our listeners to join us next week for another episode of Building High Performance Cultures. And in the meantime, if you want to learn more about this topic, please visit waterstonehc.com.